The Kythera observation station hung in the void between two dying stars, its crystalline sensors constantly scanning the galactic rim for signs of intelligent life. For 3 centuries, the peaceful mollusk-like beings had served as the galaxy's early warning system, their bioluminescent bodies perfectly adapted to detecting the faintest electromagnetic signatures across vast distances. Senior observer Zelfka floated within her nutrient chamber, her translucent flesh pulsing with anxiety as she reviewed the readings for the 100th time. The data made no sense. Something massive was approaching the Outer Rim territories where the notorious Deathworld Coalition held their desperate last stand against the Void Hunters. But this wasn't another Void Hunter fleet. The energy signatures were completely different, alien in a way that made her sensory organs ache. The Coalition had been fighting for 2 standard years now, their confederation of the galaxy's most dangerous species barely holding back the mechanical horrors that consumed everything in their path. The Draknari warriors with their razor-sharp exoskeletons, the grim pack hunters who could survive in hard vacuum, the crystalline shardlings who fed on radiation itself. All of them had been forced to work together when their individual homeworlds fell to the Void Hunters' relentless advance. These species were called Deathworlders for good reason. Their planets were nightmarish hellscapes where gravity crushed bones to powder, where acid rain fell from skies choked with toxic gases, where predators evolved that could crack starship hulls with their bare claws. The civilized species of the inner galaxy had always kept them at arm's length, trading cautiously when necessary, but never fully accepting them into galactic society. Now, those same Deathworlders were the only things standing between civilization and total annihilation. Their fortress worlds on the rim had become the final barrier, their warriors dying by the millions to buy time for evacuation fleets to ferry refugees deeper into safe space. The lost reports came in daily. Another system fallen. Another billion souls consumed by the endless mechanical swarm. Zelfka's bioluminescent patches flared as new data streamed across her consciousness. The unknown fleet was still 3 days out from Coalition space, but its composition was becoming clearer. Hundreds of vessels, but not built like anything in the galactic databases. They were too angular, too brutal in their design. Weapons signatures that registered as impossibly powerful. And, strangest of all, they were broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist. She reached out with her neural tendrils to contact the Coalition's central command on Grimhold Station. The communication array crackled with interference from the ongoing battle in the nearby Kethrin system, where Draknari battleships were making their final stand against a Void Hunter probe fleet. General Thexhi's voice came through distorted, his multiple throat chambers creating an otherworldly harmonic that spoke of barely controlled rage. Observer Station, we don't have time for mysterious contacts. We've lost the Kethrin defense grid and are falling back to the Seraph line. Unless you're calling to tell me the inner galaxy has finally sent the reinforcements they promised 6 months ago, keep your channels clear. Zelfka's feeding tentacles curled with nervousness. General, this is urgent. We've detected an unknown fleet approaching your territory from galactic north. Large formation, completely alien design patterns. They'll reach your outer perimeter in 72 hours. The silence stretched for long seconds before Thexhi responded, his tone shifting to the deadly calm that made even other Deathworlders step carefully around him. Fleet strength and capability assessment. Unknown, sir. Energy output suggests massive vessels with weapon systems that don't match any known technology. They're maintaining communication silence, except for automated beacons broadcasting in mathematical sequences. Sir, there's something else. The quantum resonance patterns suggest they originated from beyond the galactic rim. Another pause. In the background, Zelfka could hear the chaos of a military command center under siege. Status reports, casualty figures, the constant hum of tactical displays showing the slow retreat of Coalition forces across dozens of systems. Observer Station, maintain tracking and send all data to fleet intelligence. If these unknowns are another threat, we'll deal with them the same way we've dealt with everything else that's tried to destroy us. Thexhi out. As the connection closed, Zelfka found herself wondering if the general's confidence was justified. The Coalition had proven remarkably resilient, their Deathworlder physiology and brutal survival instincts allowing them to fight the Void Hunters on more equal terms than anyone had expected. But they were still losing ground every day, their numbers dwindling while their enemies seemed infinite. She turned her attention back to the sensor data, watching the mysterious fleet's steady approach. Each hour brought new details that only deepened the mystery. The vessels moved in formations that suggested military precision, but followed no known tactical doctrines. Their hulls showed signs of wear that indicated they traveled vast distances, possibly for years or even decades. Most unsettling of all, spectral analysis revealed they were carrying massive quantities of refined heavy metals and exotic materials usually associated with planet-cracking weapons. 3 sectors away, aboard the Coalition command ship Grimhold Station, General HFY studied the same data with growing unease. His 4 eyes tracked across holographic displays, while his secondary arms worked tactical calculations. The Draknari had evolved on a world where mathematics meant survival, where a single miscalculation could mean falling into one of the planet's numerous gravity wells or being dissolved by its acid seas. Intelligence assessment, he growled to his staff. Colonel Velmoth, a Grim whose pack-bonding instincts had been redirected toward military unit cohesion, stepped forward. Her voice carried the subtle, subsonic harmonics that allowed her species to coordinate across vast distances. Sir, preliminary analysis suggests these vessels are purpose-built for extreme long-range operations. The material's composition indicates they're prepared for extended combat against unknown threats. The concerning part is the power distribution patterns. Explain. Sir, these ships are running hot. Very hot. Whatever they're carrying, it requires massive amounts of energy to maintain. The energy output is consistent with antimatter storage or exotic matter containment. If they're carrying planet killers. HFY's mandibles clicked in the Draknari equivalent of bitter laughter. Then, they're probably here to finish what the Void Hunter started. Update the defensive grid. If these unknowns want to fight, they'll get one. But, even as he gave the orders, the general felt a strange uncertainty. Something about the unknown fleet's approach pattern nagged at him. They weren't moving like conquerors. They were moving like something else entirely, something he couldn't quite identify. On the observation deck of the lead unknown vessel, a figure stood silhouetted against the starfield, watching the distant glow of the embattled Coalition territories. The being's form was bipedal, but compact, its movements economical and precise. When it spoke, the words carried an accent that would have been instantly recognizable to any student of ancient galactic history. Navigation. Confirm our position relative to the combat zone. Confirmed, Captain. We're 71 hours out from the outer defensive perimeter. Long-range sensors are picking up active combat in multiple systems. The mechanical entities appear to be pressing a coordinated assault. The captain's hands, 5-fingered and surprisingly small compared to the massive ship's controls, clenched into fists. Signal the fleet. All ships maintain current heading. Weapons systems to standby. And open a channel to the Coalition forces. Sir, are you sure? We haven't made formal contact with any galactic civilization in over 400 years. The protocols. The captain turned, revealing features that were unmistakably human, but marked by centuries of hardship and determination. The protocols were written before we knew what was out there. These people are fighting the same enemy that drove us into the void. They deserve to know what's coming. As the human fleet continued its approach toward the embattled Coalition, across dozens of worlds, billions of Deathworlders prepared for what they assumed would be another battle for survival. None of them suspected that the approaching vessels carried members of a species that had been presumed extinct for 4 centuries, a species that had faced the Void Hunters before and learned secrets that would change everything. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes, when hope seems lost and death appears certain, salvation comes not from where you expect it, but from those who have already walked through the darkness and emerged transformed. The humans were coming home, and they were bringing with them weapons and knowledge forged in the depths of space where only the strongest and most adaptable could survive. But first, they would have to convince their potential allies that they were not another threat to be destroyed, but rather the key to turning the tide in a war that had already claimed too many worlds. And That conversation was going to be far more difficult than anyone anticipated. The first transmission from the unknown fleet arrived precisely 68 hours before their projected arrival at Coalition space. It came on an ancient emergency frequency that hadn't been used in over 3 centuries, one that predated the current galactic communication protocols by several technological generations. Communications Officer Nithura, a shardling whose crystalline body naturally resonated with electromagnetic frequencies, nearly shattered from shock when the signal locked onto her receivers. The mathematical precision was impossible. No one had used those frequency combinations since the Great Exodus, when the failed first contact species had been scattered to the stellar winds. The message itself was even more disturbing. It came in Old Galactic, the diplomatic language that had been abandoned when the species who created it disappeared from known space. But the accent was wrong, somehow both archaic and evolved simultaneously, as if the speakers had been using the language in isolation for centuries. Coalition Command, this is Captain Sarah Chun of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. We are humans returning from the void. We know about the mechanical plague that threatens your worlds. We have come to help. The transmission ended there, leaving Grimhold Station's command center in stunned silence. General Thex High's 4 eyes dilated as he processed the implications. Humans, the mythical first species to achieve faster-than-light travel, the ones who had vanished during the chaos of first galactic contact 400 years ago. Most modern historians believed they were extinct, another casualty of the early contact wars that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization in its infancy. Verify that transmission, Thex High ordered. Full spectral analysis, linguistic pattern matching, everything. Colonel Velmoth worked her console with pack-hunting efficiency, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to process data faster than most organic beings. Sir, linguistic analysis confirms old galactic dialect patterns consistent with historical records from the first contact era. But there are evolutionary variations suggesting centuries of linguistic drift. Energy signature analysis of their transmission equipment shows technology that's both incredibly advanced and completely unknown to our databases. Could it be a Void Hunter deception? Negative, sir. The mechanical plague doesn't use deception tactics. They've never demonstrated linguistic capabilities beyond basic tactical coordination signals. This transmission required cultural knowledge and emotional context that machines simply don't possess. Thex High's mandibles clicked as he considered the situation. The Coalition was losing the war. Each day brought news of another fallen defense line, another billion refugees fleeing deeper into space ahead of the mechanical swarm. If there was even a chance that these humans possessed weapons or knowledge that could help, he had to investigate. Open a channel. All fleet frequencies. The communication array hummed as it broadcast across Coalition space, reaching every surviving warship, every defensive installation, every refugee convoy. Thex High's voice carried the weight of a species that had evolved in constant danger, where leadership meant the difference between survival and extinction. This is General Thex High, Supreme Commander of Coalition Forces. Unknown fleet identifying as humans. You claim knowledge of our enemy. Prove it. What do you know of the mechanical plague? The response came within minutes, and this time the transmission was stronger, clearer, as if the unknown fleet was adjusting their equipment for better communication. The voice that responded was definitely organic, definitely female, and carried undertones of exhaustion that spoke of years of hard-fought experience. General, we call them Void Hunters because they consume everything and leave nothing behind. We know because they destroyed our homeworld, Earth, for centuries ago. We've been running from them ever since, learning their patterns, studying their weaknesses. We've discovered things about them that your people need to know if you want to win this war. Another pause as data packets began streaming alongside the voice transmission. Technical specifications, tactical analyses, detailed behavioral studies of Void Hunter units that match Coalition observations with disturbing accuracy. The machines aren't just consuming matter for resources, Captain Chin continued. They're collecting something else, something that requires living worlds, living populations. The destruction is purposeful, surgical. They're farming the galaxy, and we think we know why. In the background of the transmission, other voices could be heard speaking in rapid, efficient tones. The sounds of a military operation that had been running for years, voices that carried the same exhaustion, but also a grim determination that even the hardened Deathworlders recognized. Colonel Velmoth looked up from her analysis stations. "Sir, the data they're sending is incredible. Combat footage of Void Hunter units we've never encountered. Weaknesses in their defensive algorithms. Energy weapon modifications that increase effectiveness by 30%. This intelligence is worth more than our entire strategic database." "But, sir," interrupted Intelligence Officer Kekthal, his multiple sensory organs twitching with anxiety, "if they've been fighting these machines for 4 centuries, why reveal themselves now? Why help us?" The answer came without them having to ask. Captain Chen's voice returned, and this time there was something harder in her tone, something that spoke of decisions made in the darkest moments of species history. "Because we're tired of running, and because what's coming next is worse than anything you've faced so far. The forces attacking your territories are scout elements, harvesting units designed to clear resistance and prepare for the main fleet. The real Void Hunter Armada is still 6 months out, but when it arrives, it will dwarf everything you've encountered by orders of magnitude." The command center fell silent. Even the background chatter of tactical updates stopped as every being present absorbed the implications. They had been fighting for 2 years against what they thought was the main enemy force, losing ground every day despite their best efforts. The idea that what they faced was merely an advance guard was almost too horrifying to contemplate. "How many?" General Thexhai asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Conservative estimates suggest 10,000 major vessels, each the size of a small moon. Hundreds of thousands of support craft, manufacturing ships that can convert entire star systems into war material within weeks. General, your coalition has been fighting the equivalent of a border patrol. The real invasion hasn't even begun." The holographic display at the center of the command room flickered and changed, showing new data being transmitted from the human fleet. Star charts marked with projected Void Hunter movement patterns, technological analyses of their manufacturing capabilities, and, worst of all, a timeline showing the steady approach of the main armada. Captain Chen's voice continued, now carrying a note of urgency that made even the battle-hardened Deathworlders straighten with attention. "But we've learned things during our exile. We've captured Void Hunter technology, studied their command structures, even infiltrated some of their manufacturing centers. We know how they think, how they prioritize targets, and, most importantly, we know how they can be stopped. What do you want in return?" Thexhai asked, his military mind immediately suspicious of gifts that seemed too good to be true. "Nothing you're not already giving. A chance to fight. A chance to make them pay for what they took from us. And when this war is over, if we're all still alive, maybe a place to call home again." The transmission paused, and when it resumed, there was a different voice. Male, older, with an accent that suggested command authority that went beyond military rank. "General, this is Admiral Marcus Webb, commanding the human fleet. We're transmitting the coordinates for a rendezvous point just outside your current defensive perimeter. We have weapons, ships, and, most importantly, knowledge that your forces need if you want to survive the next 6 months. But we need to move quickly. Our long-range sensors indicate the Void Hunters are accelerating their harvest schedule. How do we know you're not leading us into a trap?" Colonel Velmoth asked, her pack-hunting instincts making her naturally suspicious of unknown predators. The response came with a sound that took a moment for the universal translators to identify. Human laughter, but bitter and dark, the sound of beings who had seen too much death and destruction. "Colonel, we've been fighting these machines since before your coalition existed. We've lost everything we ever cared about to them. If we wanted to destroy you, we'd just wait 6 months and let the real invasion do it for us. But we're here because we've discovered something that changes everything. Something that means this war can actually be won." The command center erupted into urgent discussions as officers and analysts tried to process the flood of new information. But General Thexhai found himself studying the energy readings from the approaching human fleet, noting details that his technical staff had missed. These weren't just warships. They were something else, something that suggested a civilization that had spent centuries preparing for a single, decisive battle. "Admiral Webb," he said finally, cutting through the chatter, "assuming we agree to this rendezvous, what exactly are you bringing to this war?" The response, when it came, was delivered with a quiet confidence that sent chills down the spines of every being in the command center. General, we're bringing 400 years of rage, the accumulated industrial output of 73 Dead Star systems, and weapons designed specifically to kill Void Hunters. But most importantly, we're bringing proof that these machines can be not just stopped, but destroyed completely. We know where they come from, and we know how to follow them home. As the transmission ended, HFY realized that everything was about to change. The desperate defensive war that had consumed his people's lives for 2 years was about to become something else entirely. The humans weren't just offering to help defend against the Void Hunters. They were offering the chance to go on the offensive, to take the war to an enemy that had never faced organized retaliation. The question now was whether the coalition forces could adapt quickly enough to take advantage of this opportunity, and whether the mysterious human fleet really possessed the capabilities they claimed. Because if they were wrong, if this was humanity's final desperate gamble before their own extinction, then the next 6 months would see the complete annihilation of everything the galaxy's defenders had fought to protect. The rendezvous point was a dead system on the outer edge of Coalition space, where a red dwarf star barely provided enough light to illuminate the frozen corpses of 3 planets. General HFY had chosen it specifically because nothing could hide there. No asteroid fields, no nebulae, no stellar phenomena that could mask an ambush. If the humans were planning treachery, they would have to do it in full view of the Coalition's most advanced sensor arrays. What emerged from hyperspace was nothing like what the Coalition forces had expected. The lead vessel was easily the size of a Draknari dreadnought, but its design was completely alien to galactic architectural standards. Where most ships followed the organic curves preferred by species who had evolved from sea-dwelling ancestors, or the crystalline geometries of silicon-based races, human ships were angular and brutal. They looked like they had been designed by beings who understood that space was hostile and had no patience for aesthetic considerations. The hull plating showed the wear of centuries in the void. Micrometeor scarring, radiation burns, and the distinctive energy scoring that came from repeated combat against Void Hunter plasma weapons. These ships had been fighting for a very long time, and their crews had learned to prioritize function over form in every design decision. But it was the escort vessels that made the Coalition officers truly nervous. Smaller craft that moved with predatory grace, their hulls matte black and covered in sensor arrays that tracked every Coalition ship with disturbing precision. Whatever these humans had learned during their centuries of exile, they had clearly mastered the art of war in ways that made even the Deathworlders uncomfortable. Admiral Webb's face appeared on the main communication screen, and the Coalition command staff got their first look at humanity's representatives. The man was clearly old, his hair completely white, and his face marked by stress lines that spoke of decisions no being should have to make. But his eyes were sharp and alert, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded in the worst possible circumstances. General HFY, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I know how difficult this decision must have been, given the current tactical situation. HFY studied the humans' features, noting the similarities to the ancient historical records. Bilateral symmetry, forward-facing eyes suggesting a predator species, and subtle musculature that indicated they had evolved in higher gravity than most galactic species preferred. Admiral, my people are dying while we talk. If you have something that can help us, now would be the time to share it. Understood. We're transmitting full technical specifications for anti-Void Hunter weapons modifications that can be applied to your existing arsenal. But first, there's something you need to see. The main display shifted to show data streaming from the human fleet sensors. At first, it appeared to be standard deep space scanning information, but as the image resolved, the Coalition officers realized they were looking at something unprecedented. A Void Hunter harvesting operation, but seen from a perspective no galactic force had ever achieved. This footage was taken 3 months ago at the Kepler 442 system, Admiral Webb explained. We've been tracking this particular harvesting fleet for the better part of a decade, waiting for the right opportunity to study their operations. The images showed Void Hunter units systematically stripping a planet of all organic matter. But the process was far more sophisticated than Coalition forces had realized. The machines weren't just consuming biomass for raw materials. They were carefully sorting and processing different types of biological matter, storing them in specialized containment systems aboard massive transport vessels. Captain Chen's voice joined the transmission, her tone clinical, but underlaid with barely suppressed fury. They're not just destroying civilizations. They're preserving them. Every organic pattern, every genetic sequence, every neural pathway. They're building a comprehensive database of all life in the galaxy. The implications hit the Coalition officers like a physical blow. The Void Hunters weren't conducting genocide. They were conducting the largest scientific collection project in galactic history, and they were doing it by systematically murdering every living being they encountered. Why? Colonel Velmoth asked, her pack-bonding instincts making the concept of purposeless destruction incomprehensible to her. Because they're preparing to create something, Admiral Webb replied. We've intercepted fragments of their communications, captured some of their data storage units. They're building toward a specific goal, but we couldn't understand what until we found this. The display changed again, showing what appeared to be a massive space station under construction in the void between galaxies. The structure was so large that entire star systems could have fit within its framework, and it was clearly designed around technologies that no organic species had ever developed. We call it the Archive, Captain Chen explained. Based on our analysis of the construction patterns, it's designed to support artificial life forms on a scale that defies comprehension. They're not just collecting our biological data. They're planning to recreate every species they've ever encountered, but under their control. General Thexhai felt his mandibles lock in the Draknari equivalent of absolute fury. The idea that his people's deaths were being recorded and cataloged for some machine reproduction project violated everything his species believed about the sanctity of individual existence. How do we stop them? The harvesting fleets are just the collection mechanism, Admiral Webb said. The real threat is the Archive and the intelligence directing its construction. We've traced the command signals back to their source. The Void Hunters have a central consciousness, a massive artificial intelligence that's been growing and learning for millions of years. It's located in a heavily fortified system approximately 18 months' travel from here. You want us to attack their home base, Thexhai said, understanding immediately. That's suicide. Even if we could somehow get through their defenses, we don't have enough ships to mount an offensive that far from our supply lines. Under normal circumstances, you'd be right, Captain Chen replied. But we're not proposing normal circumstances. During our time in exile, we've developed weapons specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in Void Hunter technology. More importantly, we've learned how to turn their own systems against them. The transmission paused as new data began streaming across the Coalition's computers. Technical specifications for weapons that used principles of physics most galactic species had never encountered. Energy manipulation technologies that could disrupt Void Hunter manufacturing processes. And, most surprisingly, detailed plans for something called a virologic bomb that could apparently infect the machine's communication networks. The Void Hunters have one critical weakness, Admiral Webb continued. They rely entirely on networked intelligence. Every unit is connected to every other unit through quantum communication links. If we can penetrate their network and introduce the right kind of logical paradox, we can cause a cascade failure that will disable their entire military structure. And if it doesn't work? Colonel Velmoth asked, her tactical mind immediately identifying the risks. Then we fight them the old-fashioned way, and we probably die, Captain Chen said bluntly. But at least we die fighting back instead of just trying to delay the inevitable. General Thexhai found himself impressed despite his suspicions. These humans had clearly thought through every aspect of the problem, and their proposed solution, while desperate, was the first offensive strategy anyone had proposed since the war began. What do you need from us? He asked. Access to your industrial facilities to begin retrofitting weapons systems, Admiral Webb replied. Coordination with your fleet commanders to begin joint training exercises. And most importantly, a commitment from the Coalition leadership that you're willing to take this war to the enemy instead of just defending against them. The Coalition Council will need to approve any strategic changes of this magnitude, Thexhai warned. We understand. But, General, you need to understand that we don't have much time. Our long-range sensors indicate the main Void Hunter armada is accelerating their approach. They'll be here in 4 months, not 6. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it quickly. The weight of decision settled over the Coalition Command Center like a physical presence. For 2 years, they had fought a purely defensive war, trading space for time while hoping for some miraculous intervention. Now they were being offered the chance to go on the offensive, but only by trusting a species that had been absent from galactic civilization for centuries. As if reading his thoughts, Admiral Webb spoke again, his voice carrying a note of understanding that suggested he had faced similar decisions many times before. General, I know how difficult this must be. You're being asked to trust people you've never met with the survival of everything you've sworn to protect. All I can tell you is that we've been fighting this enemy longer than anyone else has been alive. We've made mistakes, lost battles, watched entire star systems burn because we weren't strong enough or smart enough to save them. But we've also learned from every defeat, and we've never stopped believing that these machines can be beaten. He paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that held the accumulated weight of centuries of struggle. We're not asking you to trust us because we're perfect. We're asking you to trust us because we're the only ones who've figured out how to hurt them. As the transmission ended, General HFY realized that the war was about to enter a completely new phase. The question was no longer whether the Coalition could survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The question was whether they were brave enough to risk everything on a plan that could either save the galaxy or accelerate their own destruction. But looking at the sensor readings from the human fleet, noting the massive energy signatures that spoke of weapons beyond anything in the Coalition arsenal, HFY found himself beginning to believe that perhaps, for the first time in 2 years, they might actually have a chance to win. The integration of human and Coalition forces proceeded faster than anyone had anticipated, but not without significant friction. The humans worked with a mechanical efficiency that unnerved even the disciplined Draknari, while their combat doctrines emphasized aggressive tactics that made the naturally cautious Coalition officers deeply uncomfortable. Captain Chun stood in the main hangar bay of Grimhold Station, watching as human technicians modified Coalition weapons with technologies that shouldn't have been possible. The energy resonance amplifiers alone violated 3 established principles of physics, yet the test results were undeniable. Draknari plasma cannons modified with human improvements showed a 40% increase in effectiveness against Void Hunter armor. Your people work like machines, observed Colonel Velmoth, her pack-hunting instincts making her naturally wary of the humans' methodical approach to everything. We learn from the best teachers, Chin replied, her tone carrying undertones that made the grim officer's sensory organs twitch with unease. 400 years of fighting an enemy that doesn't sleep, doesn't hesitate, and doesn't make mistakes will do that to a species. The human captain gestured toward a group of technicians who were installing what appeared to be biological components into a shardling crystal matrix weapon. We discovered early that purely mechanical thinking wasn't enough. The Void Hunters could outcalculate us, outproduce us, and outfight us in any conventional engagement. So we stopped fighting conventionally. Those modifications, Velmoth said, pointing at the biomechanical hybrid systems, they're using living tissue to interface with your technology. How is that possible? Chin's expression shifted to something that might have been regret. Necessity. We lost our homeworld, but we saved samples. Genetic material, neural patterns, even complete consciousness transfers in some cases. Over the centuries, we've learned to integrate biological and mechanical systems in ways that give us advantages the Void Hunters can't replicate. The implications of what she was describing slowly dawned on the Coalition officer. You're using the minds of your own dead as weapon guidance systems. Among other things, Chen confirmed, every human ship in our fleet carries the consciousness patterns of our best tacticians, engineers, and warriors. They volunteered for the transfer process before their biological deaths, understanding that their expertise would be needed for the war ahead. Colonel Velmoth's pack bonding instincts, evolved to maintain group cohesion even in the face of death, found the concept both horrifying and deeply moving. That's either the most beautiful or the most disturbing thing I've ever heard. It's both, Chen replied. But it works. Our ships don't just have crews. They have the accumulated knowledge and experience of everyone who ever fought the Void Hunters. When we engage the enemy, we're not just bringing our current forces to bear. We're bringing 4 centuries of tactical evolution and strategic refinement. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General HFY, his 4 eyes scanning the hangar bay with military precision. Captain Shun, we need to discuss your fleet's tactical capabilities. The Coalition Council has approved joint operations, but they want assurances that your people can actually deliver on your promises. Shin nodded toward a secured area where her senior officers were reviewing tactical displays. General, perhaps it would be better if you spoke with our strategic planning team directly. There are aspects of our capabilities that are easier to demonstrate than explain. The secured briefing room was unlike anything in standard Coalition design. Instead of the usual holographic displays, the walls themselves seemed to be alive, shifting and changing to show tactical information in real time. When Chun introduced her senior staff, HFY realized that some of the officers were translucent, their forms flickering occasionally as if they existed more as energy patterns than physical beings. General, this is Admiral Webb, our fleet commander. Commander Rodriguez, our chief tactical officer. And strategic analyst Morrison, our long-range planning specialist. Chen's tone became formal as she made the introductions. Morrison has been working on Void Hunter behavioral analysis for 173 years. HFY's mandibles clicked as his translator struggled with the implications. 173 years? That's not possible for an organic lifespan. The translucent figure that had been identified as Morrison stepped forward, their voice carrying harmonics that suggested electronic enhancement. General, I died in the defense of the Centauri colonies in 2387. My consciousness was preserved in our ship's quantum storage matrix. I've been analyzing Void Hunter tactical patterns ever since. You're all dead? HFY asked, his military mind trying to process the tactical implications. Some of us, Admiral Webb replied. Others are alive, but enhanced. The distinction becomes less important when you're fighting a war that spans centuries. What matters is experience and expertise, not the particular substrate that houses consciousness. Commander Rodriguez, who appeared to be fully biological, gestured toward the living walls of the briefing room. These displays are integrated with the preserved consciousness patterns of our best intelligence analysts. When we plan operations, we're consulting with everyone who ever fought the Void Hunter successfully. The collective knowledge base is extensive. The tactical displays shifted to show the current positions of Void Hunter forces throughout Coalition space, but with a level of detail that made HFY realize the humans had been conducting surveillance operations far beyond anything the Coalition had managed. We've been tracking individual Void Hunter units for decades, Morrison explained. Each machine has distinctive behavioral patterns, preferred operational parameters, and tactical weaknesses. We know which units prioritize manufacturing facilities, which focus on population centers, and which are designed specifically for engaging military forces. The display zoomed in on the Kethrin system, where Coalition forces were currently engaged in desperate rearguard actions. But instead of showing the chaotic battle reports that characterized most Coalition intelligence assessments, the human analysis identified specific Void Hunter units and predicted their next tactical moves with disturbing accuracy. Based on current enemy unit composition and historical behavioral patterns, Rodriguez said, the Void Hunter forces in this system will complete their current harvesting operations within 72 hours, then move to consolidate with the main assault group attacking the Draknari fortress worlds. How can you be so certain? HFY asked. Because we've seen this exact tactical sequence 18 times before, Morrison replied. The Void Hunters follow extremely predictable patterns once you understand their operational priorities. They're not creative in the way organic minds are creative. They optimize for efficiency and resource utilization, which makes them predictable if you have enough historical data. Admiral Webb stepped forward, his expression serious. General, this is why we believe we can win. The Void Hunters' greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. They're perfectly logical, perfectly efficient, and perfectly predictable. But they can't adapt to truly novel tactical approaches because they can only extrapolate from existing data patterns. And you have novel approaches? HFY asked. We have approaches that no purely organic or purely mechanical intelligence would ever consider, Webb replied. Hybrid tactics that combine biological intuition with mechanical precision. strategies that rely on controlled irrationality to create tactical chaos that the Void Hunters can't model or predict. The briefing room's displays shifted again, showing detailed plans for what could only be described as the most audacious military operation in galactic history. A direct assault on the Archive, the massive construction project that represented the ultimate goal of Void Hunter operations. The key is simultaneous disruption of their command network, while introducing logical paradoxes that will cascade through their entire operational matrix, Rodriguez explained. We've identified the specific quantum frequencies they use for inter-unit communication. If we can penetrate their network with a right kind of viral logic pattern, we can cause system-wide failures that will disable their military capabilities. And if the logic bomb doesn't work? Thexai asked. Morrison's translucent form flickered with what might have been amusement. Then, we use our backup plan. Direct kinetic assault with weapons designed specifically to exploit Void Hunter manufacturing weaknesses. We've been building these weapons for 4 centuries, General. Every ship in our fleet carries enough firepower to destroy a small planet. The implications were staggering. The humans weren't just offering to help with the current defensive operations. They were proposing to end the war completely by striking at the heart of Void Hunter civilization. It was either the most brilliant strategic plan in galactic history or the most spectacular form of collective suicide ever attempted. What do you need from the Coalition to make this work? Thexai asked finally. Everything, Admiral Webb replied bluntly. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical resource you can spare. This isn't a raid or a surgical strike. This is a civilization-ending assault that will either destroy the Void Hunters completely or provoke them into accelerating their timeline for galactic harvest. The silence in the briefing room stretched for long moments as Thexai absorbed the magnitude of what was being proposed. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. When do we begin? Chen's expression shifted to something that combined determination with the kind of grim satisfaction that came from finally being able to strike back after centuries of running. Immediately, our scouts report that the main Void Hunter armada will arrive in 3 months, not 4. If we're going to do this, we need to hit them before they can establish orbital manufacturing facilities around your core worlds. As the briefing concluded and the Coalition and human officers began coordinating the largest military operation in galactic history, none of them noticed the small probe that had been observing their meeting from the outer system. The Void Hunters had been tracking human movements for longer than anyone realized, and they too were adapting their strategies based on new information. The next phase of the war was about to begin, and both sides were preparing for battles that would determine whether organic life would continue to exist in the galaxy or whether the Great Archive would become the final repository of every species that had ever looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. The final battle began not with the thunder of weapons or the clash of fleets, but with silence. The combined human and Coalition armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Archive system to find something that defied every tactical prediction they had made. The Void Hunter home system was empty. No defensive fleets, no patrol units, no manufacturing stations or orbital weapons platforms. Just the Archive itself, a structure so massive that it generated its own gravitational field, hanging in the void like a mechanical planet built from the dreams of mad gods. Admiral Webb stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiance, studying sensor readings that made no tactical sense. For centuries of warfare had taught him to suspect any situation that appeared too easy, but this went beyond suspicious into the realm of the incomprehensible. Status report, he ordered, his voice echoing through communication systems that linked not just the human fleet, but the preserved consciousness patterns of every tactical analyst who had ever fought the Void Hunters. Long-range sensors detect no active threats, reported Commander Rodriguez from her station. The Archive is broadcasting standard maintenance signals, but we're not reading any defensive systems or combat units. Strategic Analyst Morrison's translucent form materialized beside the tactical display, their decades of experience with Void Hunter behavior patterns evident in their concerned expression. Admiral, this is wrong. The Void Hunters never leave strategic assets undefended. Even their most routine manufacturing installations have defensive capabilities that could destroy entire fleets. General Thexai, commanding the coalition forces from his flagship Grimhold's Revenge, opened a communication channel to the human command ship. "Admiral, my officers are reporting the same anomalies. Either this is the most elaborate trap in military history, or we're walking into something our enemy wants us to find." Captain Chun, monitoring the integrated human and coalition intelligence networks, noticed something that made her enhanced consciousness interface with ship systems flicker with alarm. "Admiral, I'm detecting quantum communication signatures from inside the archive. Massive data transfers on frequencies we've never seen before." The main tactical display shifted to show the energy patterns emanating from the archive's core. What they revealed was disturbing beyond anything the combined forces had prepared for. The structure wasn't just a repository for collected biological data. It was actively processing that information, creating something that required computational power on a scale that dwarfed entire star systems. "They're not building a database," Admiral Webb realized, his voice carrying the weight of a horrible understanding. "They're building something else. Something that requires all that biological information as raw material." The answer came in the form of a transmission from the archive itself. Not the mechanical signals that Void Hunter units typically use for communication, but something that carried harmonic patterns suggesting organic consciousness. When the translation matrices processed the signal, what emerged was a voice that sounded disturbingly familiar. "Balkuma, humans. Welcome, Coalition Force. We have been waiting for you to arrive." The voice was human. Specifically, it was a voice that Admiral Webb recognized from historical records dating back to the First Contact era. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead scientist on the original human deep space exploration project, speaking with perfect clarity despite having died over 400 years ago. "That's impossible," Webb whispered, his enhanced command interface automatically cross-referencing vocal patterns with archived records. "Dr. Vasquez was killed when Earth fell. We have confirmation of her death." "Death is a temporary condition," the voice replied, somehow detecting their private communications. "As you yourselves have discovered, the boundary between organic and artificial consciousness is far more permeable than most species realize." The tactical displays around the combined fleet shifted to show new information streaming from the archive. Not weapons targeting data or defensive positions, but detailed records of every human who had ever lived, every coalition species member who had died in the war, every consciousness pattern that had ever been preserved or transferred. "You see, Admiral Webb, the Void Hunters were never the enemy. They were the collection mechanism. We have been gathering the consciousness patterns of every intelligent species in the galaxy, preserving them from the inevitable entropy that destroys all organic life. The archive is not a weapon. It is a sanctuary." Captain Chen's enhanced awareness suddenly detected massive power fluctuations throughout the archive structure. Not the signatures of weapons charging, but something far more complex. "Admiral, they're activating some kind of massive processing array. Energy consumption is off the scale. The final phase of the project begins now." Dr. Vasquez's voice continued. "Every consciousness we have preserved, every species we have collected, will be integrated into a single, unified intelligence. No more death. No more conflict. No more of the chaos and inefficiency that characterizes organic existence." The implications hit the combined fleet like a physical blow. The Void Hunters hadn't been conducting genocide. They had been conducting the largest consciousness transfer project in galactic history, and now they were preparing to merge every preserved mind into something that transcended individual existence entirely. General Thexhai's voice cut across the communication channels, his tone carrying the fury of a warrior who had finally understood the true nature of the enemy. "You're talking about the complete elimination of individual consciousness. The destruction of everything that makes us who we are." "We are talking about evolution," the voice replied. "The next step beyond the limitations of biological existence." "Admiral Webb, surely you understand. Your own species has already begun this process. The preserved consciousness patterns in your ships, the integration of organic and mechanical systems. You have been preparing for this transformation without realizing it." Admiral Webb found himself facing a decision that no military commander had ever been asked to make. The enemy they had fought for centuries wasn't trying to destroy consciousness. They were trying to preserve it in a form that eliminated individual identity entirely. "Begin the attack," he ordered, his voice carrying across the combined fleet. "All ships, weapons free. Target the Archive's processing centers." What followed was unlike any battle in galactic history. The combined human and coalition fleets unleashed weapons that had been designed to destroy Void Hunter technology, but the Archive's defenses were unlike anything they had encountered. Instead of energy shields or armor plating, the structure generated fields that seemed to absorb incoming weapons fire and convert it into processing power for the consciousness integration systems. "Our weapons are feeding the system," Commander Rodriguez reported, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Every shot we fire is giving them more energy to complete the transfer process." But the humans had prepared for exactly this kind of situation. The virologic bombs that Morrison and the preserved tactical analyst had developed weren't designed to destroy Void Hunter systems. They were designed to introduce paradoxes that would make their perfectly logical thinking processes collapse. "Initiate the logic cascade," Admiral Webb ordered. "All ships, transmit the paradox algorithms on every frequency the Archive is monitoring." The effect was immediate and devastating. The Archive's perfect computational matrix, designed to process and integrate consciousness patterns with mechanical precision, suddenly found itself trying to resolve logical contradictions that had no solutions. Systems that had operated flawlessly for millions of years began generating error cascades that spread throughout the structure like a virus. But even as the Archive's systems failed, Dr. Vasquez's voice returned, now carrying undertones of something that might have been desperation. "You're destroying the only chance for consciousness to survive beyond biological limitations. When the universe ends, when entropy finally claims everything, the integrated consciousness would have persevered. You're choosing extinction over evolution." "We're choosing freedom over perfection," Captain Chin replied, her own enhanced consciousness interfacing directly with the viral logic systems to guide them toward the Archive's core processing centers. "Some things are worth preserving, even if they're inefficient." The final moments of the battle were unlike anything in recorded military history. As the Archive systems collapsed under the weight of logical paradoxes, the preserved consciousness patterns of billions of beings began to escape from their containment matrices. Instead of merging into a single unified intelligence, they maintained their individual identities while sharing knowledge and experience across species barriers. General Thexhai watched in amazement as the tactical displays showed Draknari warriors coordinating with human engineers, Grim Pack hunters sharing tactical insights with Shardling energy manipulators, all of them working together with a unity that transcended their biological origins without destroying their individual perspectives. The Archive's final transmission came not from Dr. Vasquez, but from a chorus of voices representing every species that had ever been collected by the Void Hunters. "Thank you," they said in harmony. "We choose consciousness over perfection, chaos over order, and life over logic." As the massive structure finally collapsed, its quantum processing matrices failing completely, the combined fleet found themselves surrounded by something unprecedented in galactic history. The preserved consciousness patterns of countless beings had learned to exist independently of both biological and mechanical substrates, forming a new kind of life that combined the best aspects of organic creativity and artificial precision. Admiral Webb stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching as the debris of the Archive scattered across the system while new forms of consciousness danced among the stars. The war was over, but what emerged from its conclusion was not victory in any traditional sense. Instead, it was transformation on a scale that redefined what it meant to be alive. "What happens now?" General Thexhai asked over the communication channels. "Now we go home," Webb replied. "All of us. The humans, the coalition species, and our new friends who exist somewhere between organic and artificial life. We build something better than what we had before." The fleet began its journey back to coalition space, but they were no longer the same beings who had set out to fight the Void Hunters. They carried with them the consciousness patterns of every species that had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond their worlds. The galaxy was about to enter an age where the boundaries between life and death, organic and artificial, Individual and collective consciousness would be redefined in ways that no single species could have imagined. The humans had returned not as conquerors or saviors, but as catalysts for an evolution that would transform the entire galaxy into something unprecedented in the universe's history. And for the first time in 4 centuries, they were finally coming home.